They thought killing a monster would make them heroes. 23 stab wounds later, Rome didn't hand them a parade, it handed them a death sentence. This is the story history books leave out, what really happened to the men who murdered Caligula. The Last Walk of a God Emperor. January the 24th, 41 AD. Rome is celebrating games in honor of the divine Augustus, and the young Emperor Gaius, the man history would remember by his soldier's nickname, Caligula, is walking through a narrow covered gallery that connects his palace to the theater. He is 28 years old. He believes himself untouchable. He believes himself a god. He is wrong on both counts. Waiting for him in that corridor is a man named Cassius Chaerea, a decorated Praetorian tribune, a veteran who once cut his way out of a mutinous mob during the Rhine Legion's darkest hour, a soldier who had survived battles that killed better men than Caligula. 4 months, the emperor had mocked him mercilessly, taunting him publicly about his voice, forcing him to repeat obscene passwords in front of the entire guard, turning him into the punchline of the palace. Chaerea had absorbed the humiliation in silence. But silence, in Rome, has a breaking point. As Caligula pauses to speak with a group of young boys rehearsing a performance, Chaerea steps forward, draws his blade, and strikes the emperor from behind. It is not clean. It is not merciful. Ancient sources tell us Caligula was struck roughly 30 times, the same number of wounds, historians noted with grim symbolism, that felled his own ancestor Julius Caesar nearly a century earlier. The other conspirators, centurions, tribunes, disillusioned senators, pile in behind him, driving their blades into the body of the man they called God. His God, when it finally arrives too late. Caligula is already dead on the gallery floor. For one single, suspended moment, the conspirators believe they have won. What none of them yet understand is that killing an emperor is the easy part. Surviving what comes next, that is the real battle. And most of them are about to lose it. A republic that never arrives. Chaerea and his fellow plotters did not do this for glory alone. In their minds, they were not just killing a tyrant, they were ending the entire imperial experiment. Rome, they believed, could go back to being a republic, a senate governing without a god-king standing over it. For a few frantic hours after the assassination, this dream feels almost real. Senators rush to an emergency session. Men speak openly, for the first time in years, about liberty, about the restoration of the old constitution, about a Rome without a single master. But there is a problem the conspirators never accounted for. The Praetorian Guard was never loyal to an idea. It was loyal to a paycheck, and to whoever could keep the gold flowing. While the Senate debates philosophy in marble chambers, soldiers are moving through the palace with a far more practical concern. Chaos means danger, and danger means somebody needs to be in charge, fast. And in the panic, they stumble onto something almost accidental, a terrified, stammering older man hiding behind a curtain in a side room of the palace. His name is Claudius. He is Caligula's uncle, the family's perpetual embarrassment, mocked for a stammer and a limp, dismissed his entire life as unfit to rule anything. He is hiding, quite reasonably, because he assumes the men storming through the palace are there to kill every remaining member of the imperial family, himself included. Instead, the soldiers who find him do something that will reshape the next 4 centuries of Roman history. They don't kill him. They don't even arrest him. They hail him. Because a frightened man behind a curtain, awkward as he is still a bloodline the army can rally behind, and a bloodline means back pay, means bonuses, means stability. Within hours, Claudius is carried to the Praetorian camp on soldiers' shoulders, not as a prisoner, but as their candidate for emperor. The men who murdered Caligula to destroy the throne have, without meaning to, just handed that same throne to the one member of the family they never even considered a threat. The Senate loses the room. Back in the Senate house, the mood curdles fast. Word arrives that the Praetorians have proclaimed Claudius. Senators who, moments earlier, were passionately debating the return of liberty now understand, with sinking clarity, that they have no army. They have speeches. The guard has swords, and swords have always outvoted speeches in Rome. There is no battle. There doesn't need to be one. By the next day, the Senate, for all its talk of restored freedom, capitulates and formally recognizes Claudius as emperor. The republic that Chaerea and his co-conspirators believed they were reviving lasted, in practical terms, about a day. Rome does not become a free republic again. Rome gets a new emperor, one who now knows, in the most personal way imaginable, exactly how his predecessor died, and exactly who held the knife. This is the moment the conspirators' fate is effectively sealed, though most of them do not realize it yet. They assume that killing a monster earns forgiveness. They are about to learn that new emperors do not forgive men who have proven emperors can be killed. Blood beyond the emperor. What the official history often glosses over is what happened in the minutes after Caligula fell, because the killing did not stop with him. In the chaos, conspirators moved through the palace hunting down the rest of the imperial household. Caligula's wife, Caesarea, was killed. Their infant daughter, barely old enough to walk, was killed as well, her small skull, according to the grim account left by ancient historians, dashed against a wall. This detail matters enormously for what comes later, because Claudius, a man who had every political reason to at least tolerate his nephew's assassins, could never forgive that particular act. Killing an emperor could, with the right framing, be dressed up as tyrannicide, a service to Rome. Killing a baby could not be dressed up as anything. It was simply murder. And it gave Claudius the moral cover he needed to do what every new emperor secretly wants to do to the men who proved his predecessor was mortal: eliminate them. The politics of selective mercy. Here is where the story becomes less about vengeance and more about cold political arithmetic. Dozens of men, by some accounts, had a hand in the conspiracy: Praetorian officers, centurions, senators who gave tacit approval, courtiers who looked away. Claudius could not execute all of them. Too many powerful families were connected to the plot, too many officers in his own guard had, at minimum, known what was coming and said nothing. A wide purge risked the one thing a brand new, physically unimposing emperor could not survive: a mutiny of his own protectors. So Claudius does something shrewd. Instead of a bloodbath, he stages a filtered reckoning. Most of the conspirators are quietly pardoned, folded back into the machinery of the state, watched but not touched, a message that loyalty going forward would be rewarded with silence about the past. But a small number of men, the ones whose actions could not be politically absorbed, are selected to answer for the whole conspiracy. It is not justice in any pure sense. It is theater, a controlled demonstration designed to look like justice while protecting the broader stability of the throne. And at the very center of that theater stands Cassius Chaerea. The trial that wasn't really a trial. Chaerea does not run. This is perhaps the most striking detail historians note about him. A man capable of walking up to a living god and driving a blade into his spine does not flee Rome when the new regime turns against him. Whether from pride, fatalism, or genuine belief that history would vindicate him, he stays. Claudius has him condemned to death. The official justification leans heavily on the murder of Caesarea and the infant Julia Drusilla, acts that even sympathetic senators struggled to defend, rather than the killing of Caligula himself, which too many powerful Romans had quietly celebrated to prosecute openly. It is a carefully chosen legal angle: punish the atrocity, not the tyrannicide, and avoid turning Chaerea into a martyr for liberty. Chaerea asks for one final dignity: to be executed with his own sword, the very blade, by most accounts, that struck Caligula down. It is granted. In a bitter, almost poetic irony, the same weapon that ended an emperor's reign becomes the instrument of the assassin's own death. He is executed, alone, without the trial by Senate his own coup had once promised to restore to Rome. The others. Chaerea was not entirely alone in facing consequences, though he was the highest-profile casualty. Other lesser conspirators and loyalists connected to the killing found their fates tied to how useful, or how dangerous, they remained to the new administration. Some were executed alongside or shortly after Chaerea as examples. Others, more fortunate or more politically insulated, were absorbed back into imperial service, their pasts quietly buried under the empire's need for experienced soldiers and administrators. A few spent the rest of their lives never quite trusted again, watched by a guard that now understood, more clearly than ever, the terrifying power it held over the men who wore purple. The lesson Rome's soldiers took from all of this was not assassination has consequences. It was something far more dangerous for the empire's future. An emperor's life now visibly depended entirely on the goodwill of the men paid to guard him, and that goodwill could be bought, threatened, or withdrawn. Damnatio memoriae. While the conspirators faced Claudius's selective justice, the Senate turned its fury on a target that could not fight back: Caligula's memory itself. Statues of the dead emperor were pulled down across the city. Coins bearing his image were melted or defaced. His name was scraped from official inscriptions wherever politically convenient, a practice the Romans called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It was an attempt to erase him from history entirely, to pretend, retroactively, that a god emperor of Rome had simply never happened. It didn't fully work, of course. Caligula's name survived, infamous, monstrous, endlessly retold, precisely because erasure this dramatic tends to generate its own legend. But the men who killed him were not so lucky. Most of their names, save Chaerea's, faded into the footnotes of history, remembered, if at all, as instruments rather than agents, men who set events in motion they could never control. The precedent that outlived them all. Here is the darkest irony of the entire episode. Cassius Chaerea and his co-conspirators killed Caligula believing they were saving Rome from one-man rule forever. What they actually did, the thing no history textbook fits neatly onto a single page, was prove to every Praetorian guard for the next 3 centuries that emperors could be made and unmade by soldiers with swords and grievances. Claudius survived because a terrified man in a curtain was, by pure accident of birth, useful to the army. Future emperors would not always be so lucky. The precedent set in the blood-slicked corridor of January 41 AD, that an emperor's throne rested not on law, not on divine right, not on the Senate, but on the loyalty of armed men who could be bribed, flattered, or enraged, would haunt Rome for the rest of its imperial history. The year of the 4 emperors, decades later. The auctioning of the throne itself in 193 AD. Assassination after assassination, coup after coup, all of it traces a direct line back to the moment Chaerea's blade proved that a god could bleed, and that the men guarding him could decide, on a whim, who got to wear the purple next. Chaerea died believing he had struck a blow for liberty. In truth, he had struck the match that would keep the Roman throne burning in fear for the rest of its existence, a fear no emperor, however powerful, would ever fully shake again. What remains? Walk through Rome today and you will find no monument to Cassius Chaerea. No plaque marks the corridor where an emperor died, no statue honors the men who believed, for one bloody afternoon, that they had saved a republic. History remembers Caligula as the monster. It remembers Claudius as the accidental emperor who stumbled from behind a curtain into absolute power. And it remembers Chaerea, when it remembers him at all, as a footnote, a man who won the fight and lost everything that came after. That is the part the textbooks leave out. The assassination wasn't the climax of this story. It was only the opening act of a much darker one, where the killers of a tyrant discovered, too late, that the empire they thought they were destroying was far more resilient, far more ruthless, and far more unforgiving than the man they had just put in the ground.